Let's shift gears now. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has condemned Israel's airstrike on the Lebanese city of Nabatieh. While the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed it's hit the city, killing 5 people, including the city's mayor Ahmed Kahil. According to the Prime Minister, this new aggression, coupled with all the crimes committed by the Israeli enemy against civilians, is a design of the world that is deliberately silent about the crimes of the occupation, which encourages it to persist in its transgression and crimes. The governor of Nabatieh, Hawaida Turk, said the strike occurred during a meeting of the crisis meeting coordinating aid for civilians remaining in the area. An eyewitness described the situation as frantic terror, saying at least 9 violent airstrikes targeted the city within the span of 30 minutes. Meanwhile, Israeli military has released footage of what it says were airstrikes said to have targeted Hamas militants. According to the IDF, the strike hit a clinic in the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency at the Jabaliyah refugee camp in Gaza. Another video shows Israeli troops inside the clinic showed a landmine stored on a shelf and other weapons and ammunition the troops said they found at that location. The location of the video, however, cannot be independently verified, but Israel's routinely accusing Hamas of operating out of crowded civilian areas, pinning blame for civilian casualties on the militant group. Hamas has denied using any civilian infrastructure or even endangering civilians through its actions. Lebanon is paying the price for a vicious regime of terror. Those are words of Israel's president, the words of Isaac Herzog during an address at a cabinet meeting in the Israeli city of Haifa. President Herzog said that pressure on Hezbollah is fast approaching, calling on the international community to condemn Hezbollah's action and demand immediate solution to tensions in the Middle East. We now get back to our story on Israel and the military operations there. We have VOA's correspondents from Beirut join us now on the show. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. All right, let's go to Mr. Chidi Nwanu for now. We'll get back to the other. I want to bring in his security expert, and he joins us from London in the United Kingdom. Hello, Chidi. Thank you for joining us on The World today.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
All right, why do you think that Israel has been stalling on its attack on Iran? We have seen intensified attacks in Gaza, and these are all seeming like distractions from the real strategy underneath when we think about this.
Well, there are several reasons. The first will be Israel needs to prepare itself for the attack. As we can see in the last few days, the Americans have moved an air defense system into Israel, giving them additional protection against any Iranian retaliation. This serves not just an operational purpose, the practical purpose of shooting down any Iranian missiles, but also it serves a strategic purpose of showing that the United States is in the fight with Israel, even if it's just in a defensive way. The second element being this Yom Kippur has just passed in Israel, and this is a big festival in the Jewish religious calendar. It doesn't preclude the Israelis launching an attack on that day, but it's the Day of Atonement, so it's not meant to be a day that's used for offensive operations of this kind, although, of course, the war continued in Lebanon and Gaza. So the Israelis most likely wanted this day to pass in order to prepare themselves for this war. But the final point is that the longer they keep the attack on Iran from happening, the more the Iranians have to keep guessing what the targets will be, the severity of the attack. It's also put strain on the Iranian forces. The Iranian forces would have been on high alert ever since their own attack. This having to be on high alert constantly at your post, constantly moving your systems around, it puts a lot of strain on them, and it means it's more likely that the Israelis will be able to pick up patterns and identify their defensive positions, and also that Iranians might be tired and make mistakes when the attack finally comes.
But earlier in the week, we heard from the Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, saying that Iran will respond to any Israeli strike. Why are they turning their attention to themselves? And is Iran even a victim in this war on Hezbollah? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chidi Nwanu. If we have time, we'll get back to that again. But thank you very much again. The UN Refugee Agency's Middle East Director, Rema Jamus, is already telling press in Geneva that new Israeli evacuation orders to 20 villages in southern Lebanon meant that over a quarter of the country was now affected. Israeli strikes have killed at least 2,309 people over the last year. The Lebanese government said that more than 1.2 million have been displaced. The majority have been killed since last September, when Israel expanded its own military campaign, and the toll does not distinguish between civilians and combatants. More now on the promise to withhold military to Israel. That warning is coming from the United States. The update, however, is that 50 trucks carrying humanitarian aid have now crossed into northern Gaza Strip. The stipulation by the U.S. giving in writing over the weekend amounts to the strongest known written warning from the U.S. to its ally, and it's coming amid a new Israeli offensive in northern Gaza that has reportedly caused a large number of civilian casualties. The massive aid that the message also adds that the U.S. has deep concerns about the deteriorating humanitarian situation, accusing Israel of denying or impeding almost 90% of humanitarian movements between the north and the south last month. U.S. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, who says the letter was originally designed to be private, spoke to the U.S.'s decision.
Largely because we hope that Israel makes the changes that the Secretary outlined in the letter. I'm not going to speak to it beyond the language that's in the letter, other than to say that we continue to see Israel not taking sufficient steps to address civilian harm. And you have to look no further to understand that than the really horrific results over the weekend.
Welcome back. And we told you earlier that Lebanon is paying the price for a regime of terror, and words from Isaac Zagorg, who said this during an address at his cabinet meeting in the Israeli city of Haifa. President Herzog said the pressure on Hezbollah is already fast approaching, calling the international community to condemn its action. We had Mr. Chidi Nwanu, who's a security expert, join us earlier, and he's back now to tell us more and from where we left it. Hello, Mr. Nwanu. Thank you again for joining us on The World Today.
Hello again.
All right. So I was asking you earlier about what happened last week, where Iran's nuclear supreme leader had told Iran responding to any Israeli strike. And we were asking, why are tensions now turning on themselves at this moment? And is Iran even a victim in this whole war on Hezbollah?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't describe Iran as a victim of the war. I mean, Iran is an active participant, even though by proxy. But the Iranians, in their own version of this, would see themselves as people who have maybe been unfairly put upon. So from the Iranian point of view, they suffered an attack in Tehran where a Hamas leader was killed by, what they would consider a terrorist attack. They've had their operatives killed in Syria, in Lebanon by Israeli strikes, either claimed or not claimed. They've seen, attacks on Hezbollah. They've seen even Iranian diplomats, killed or injured in the pager attack. So there was a lot of, from the Iranian point of view, there's a lot of kind of what we would say casus belli for this conflict with Israel. But I wouldn't describe them as a victim. And I think from their perspective, they are just as keen as anyone else not for this war to not escalate. Because whilst they can inflict a lot of damage on Israel, they can inflict a lot of damage on the rest of the Gulf states, the war would be completely ruinous for Iran as a country and the Islamic Republic as a ruling administration.
We have also seen, what could be regarded as a new target for Israeli forces. We see UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. The UN even wants Israel to stop with these attacks. Israel insists the UN peacekeepers are camped in areas close to Hezbollah's militants. What does the Israeli army suspect? Do they suspect any connivance between Hezbollah and the United Nations, in your own view?
Well, it's unclear what the Israelis genuinely suspect. I think there is a certain level of suspicion that there is a collusion between Hezbollah and the United Nations, between the UNIFIL troops, or if not collusion, at least a certain element of compromise in that they've allowed Hezbollah to to operate quite freely, which is true. The Hezbollah does operate quite freely there, but the United Nations forces are in a very unenvious position in that they don't have the forces to actually physically push Hezbollah back. They don't have the forces to protect the Lebanese from Israeli strikes. So they're just essentially there as observers. The second element being that the UNIFIL positions are on what we call in the military vital ground. They're on positions that are useful from a military point of view, good vantage points, places that overlook, key choke points, key routes of communication. So from a military point of view, you want to control these, or at least you want to make sure nobody else is controlling them. So that would inform the Israeli behavior towards UNIFIL, as well as a certain element of what I would say maybe is strategic bullishness, where they're quite willing to go. Throughout this conflict, they've pushed this narrative of the United Nations being against them. They've even declared the United Nations Secretary General persona non grata. So they're quite happy to have this conflict per se with the United Nations, because it fits into the general narrative they have around this war of everyone being against them, and this being a general war against the Israeli state, the Jewish people as a whole. And there's a whole lot of enablers that they need to confront, of which they've decided that the UN is one of them.
But would you say the Hezbollah militants are better equipped than the Lebanese army? And where do you think the UN-backed government have their loyalties?
Well, definitely. The Hezbollah-backed forces, or the Hezbollah forces, are much better equipped than the Lebanese forces, better trained, better experienced, because you've got to remember that the Hezbollah fighters have fought in, some of them have fought in Syria, they've fought as well as fighting in Lebanon. Some of them have been mercenaries, and if you go back, even to the Sierra Leone war, there were, Hezbollah fighters, acting as mercenaries there. So they've fought quite far and wide. Even some of them have gone to South America and, acted in those theaters. So they've got very, very good combat experience. They're very well equipped by a non-state actor kind of equipment tables. And at the same time, they've got a very good, or at least they did before the Israelis destroyed most of their command network. They have, good command and control. They've got a very good missile arsenal, much more sophisticated missiles than I think any country can think of, maybe in sub-Saharan Africa. They're a very equipped, very competent and capable force. And as you can see with the fight currently going on in southern Lebanon, the Israelis have been unable to achieve the kind of rapid success that, you would expect, even though they've decapitated Hezbollah. So they're a competent force, but they're not a match for a nation state. They will be defeated, but it will be very, very difficult.
I mean, with conditions already coming from the United States to his ally right now, I wonder what will be left of Israeli-U.S. relations at the end of this war. But just yesterday, if we recall, the U.S. government issued a 30-day ultimatum to Israel to improve humanitarian situation in Gaza, or it would experience cuts in U.S. military aid. If you were to think about this, what would be your thoughts about it?
Well, the restriction, the 30-day restriction is again, one of these things that you look at and it doesn't even sound good on paper. When the question you ask about U.S.-Israeli relations is a very interesting question, because U.S.-Israeli relations will depend on who wins the election, which is in a few weeks in America. If it's Trump, I believe most people think that Trump will be much more favorable to Netanyahu. He'll be much less concerned about restrictions and trying to preserve Palestinian lives. But then if you look at Biden and maybe by extension Harris, Palestinians, they've lost 40,000 Palestinians have been lost already. Several thousand Lebanese have been lost already. So whilst they may make the right noises about humanitarian aid, it doesn't have much of an effect on the ground. And the 30-day restriction that the 30 days ultimatum they've given to the Israelis is broadly pointless, because within 30 days they can inflict as much damage as they like, and it will cause the same amount of casualties. And at the end of the 30 days they can claim that the Israelis have been compliant and continue arms supplies. So at the end of the day, that restriction, it doesn't help the Palestinians on the ground. It does not restrain the Israelis. But most importantly, from America's point of view, it does not message to the world, especially to their allies, to other competitor states, that they're serious about restraining Israel and that they're serious about safeguarding the lives of the Palestinians and the Lebanese. So it's a lose-lose situation for the U.S., however this comes out.
Well, knowing Israel and its, I don't know how to explain this now, being a bit stubborn, do you think that this 30-day ultimatum will be granted to the United States? And do you even think that this war is something Israel can win?
A bit stubborn is an understatement, but yes.
I didn't want to use another word. So stubborn was more like it.
But you're very correct. They're very well. We have to be clear when we're talking about Israelis. You know, you're talking about the Israeli government, the Israeli military, but in particular Netanyahu and his particular coalition that he needs to stay in government. And whilst there are many Israelis who support the war both in the north and in Gaza, many of them don't agree with the tactics. Many of them would like a ceasefire and a negotiation in order to get the hostages free. While Netanyahu sees this war as an opportunity to destroy Hamas and destroy Hezbollah. While there are many members of the coalition who quite publicly see this war as an opportunity to essentially recolonize Gaza and recolonize southern Lebanon. So it's a very complex mix that they've got to kind of balance, which would be very difficult for even a really, kind of a leader with good intentions. But one can never know what the intentions of Prime Minister Netanyahu is. So I would say that it's unlikely that this is going to have an effect on the Israelis, although, as we can see now, some more aid trucks have gone into Gaza. But as we can see, they've not halted some of their more egregious attacks, such as attacks on hospitals, schools, mosques, where, whether legitimately or not, they will claim there was a Hamas command post there, drop, ordnance and kill a lot of civilians, and consider, if in a Western military, that would be a war crime. Any commander who conducted such an attack would go into prison. So it's very unclear how the Israelis are going to modify that behavior, and also there is no incentive for them to modify that behavior. Joe Biden cannot restrain them before the election because it will be a gift to his opponent. And after the election, if Trump wins, he's not going to restrain them, and Harris will be in the same bind as Biden. So the Israelis have a free rein going forward, and they're quite likely to exploit that.
Mr. Warner, before I let you go, when we talk about Israeli side of how they view this whole war, do you think at the end of this war, Benjamin Netanyahu will still remain in power? Do you think the Israelis will kick him out?
I would suggest that one of the key things about Israeli politics is never bet against Benjamin Netanyahu surviving. So I would not be surprised if, yes, I mean, there is a great appetite for getting rid of him. But even if you got rid of him today, I would not be surprised if he came back again in another year, 2 years, 3 years. He's a great survivor in Israeli politics. And, if you were very cynical, you would say one of the reasons why he keeps extending this war, why after completely destroying Gaza and killing, the vast majority of Hamas, why he continues this war is because the moment this war ends, there's going to be a reckoning for, the failures of October the 7th. And those failures will result in him leaving office and then standing trial for corruption and all the other problems that he has.
Thank you very much, security experts, Mr. Chidinwano. Thanks a lot for your exciting contribution on The World Today.
Thanks for having me.